It's dinner time at the Replimat, and Bashir is offering Plain Simple Garak a cream pie, Yigrish cream pie specifically, but Plain Simple Garak declines as he's trying to lose weight. The offer of an exercise holoprogram prompts Plain Simple Garak to provide a program in return, though this one is for entertainment as it's a gift. It'll be Bashir's birthday in a few days, you see, and he'll be turning 30. Bugger all of that, though, as Quark interrupts with a newcomer. As we've not dragged the wheel of names out for a while, let's do that and slap a label of our own on them. Our spiky-faced lad will henceforth be known as... Mr. Nosybonk, submitted by Ensign Cass Fireborn. Mr. Nosybonk here is looking to buy some medical goop, and was very determined that Quark should ask Bashir, despite him clearly not wanting to. The reason Quark was hesitant is that this particular medical goop is strictly controlled, so much so that even trying to buy it is very illegal indeed. Mr. Nosybonk was clearly not happy with being turned down, hence him giving the infirmary a good old-fashioned burglarizing when Bashir gets there later. The interruption ends with Bashir getting Emperor Palpatined and having a little nap. He awakes to find some electrical problems. As well as the lights flickering and his screens showing interference, there's no answer when he tries to call security or ops, and the computer's not responding either. He can hear something, though, perhaps those distant voices mentioned in the title, and pops onto the promenade to look for them. What he finds is a mirror that shows he has greying hair, but the sound of glass smashing in Quark stops him from dwelling on it. Quark's in there and gibbering about someone who's going to kill them all. He legs it when the noises get closer, and Bashir, trying to assert his authority, gets a chair tossed at him. He instead takes Quark's approach and buggers off as well, so he's back on the promenade when he's grabbed. It's Plain Simple Garak this time, and he knows as little as Bashir about what's going on. Theorizing is interrupted by a return of the whispered voices Bashir heard after waking, though Plain Simple Garak seems not to hear them. Bashir's also sprouted some more grey hair, possibly prompting his decision to get a move on. They grab weapons before splitting up to search for others, which feels like a rookie horror story mistake to me, but maybe they haven't yet realized they're in one. Bashir's having a poke around some corridors when the lights start to go out. Some running away ensues and he pops into a lift, though Mr. Nosybonk looks like he wants to use it as well. Bashir's not in a generous mood and kicks at Mr. Nosybonk's fingers, possibly because he's upset at how grey his hair is getting and the lift doors close. Mr. Nosybonk doesn't take no for an answer and tries to break in through the roof, so Bashir decides it's time to leave. He spat out into a corridor where we can hear voices more clearly, so he goes to investigate. Kira, Dax, O'Brien and Odo are arguing around a table about what to do. It's all very confrontational, and even Bashir thinks this is odd. Asking the computer to scan them does nothing as it's broken, but it does at least let them know he's suspicious, which might have been the point. The whispering voices return, and again nobody but him can hear them. That makes them suspicious of him before they start bickering again. As Bashir seems to be the only one in full control of himself, he takes charge and off they all go to repair the sensors and try to understand what's going on. The sensors are totally roasted according to O'Brien, but he can get the communications system working. Rather than the expected link to Bajor, they instead start listening to a chat between Dax and Cisco. They're talking about treatment for telepathic damage, and according to them, the patient is Bashir. If they can't find a way to fix him and get him out of his coma, he'll be dead in a few hours. A medical diagnosis is one thing Bashir knows how to handle, so he starts scanning himself. If the results he's getting are accurate, the voices he's just heard are right, and he's in a coma. And that seems reasonable to him based on everybody else's behaviour as well. Everybody acting as they currently are isn't logical as they're all trained and experienced, but it does make sense if they're manifestations of personality traits. O'Brien is doubt, Kira is aggression, Odo is suspicion, and Dax is bravery. It's quite the leap to make, but we'll assume Bashir is trained in psychology as well. That and the fact that the others aren't showing any signs of life when he scans them. Odo asks what Mr. Nosybonk is supposed to be if none of them are real. Bashir thinks that he's the damage, hence him trying to trash the station. That would tie into them being able to hear reality when O'Brien fixed the comm system, and the logical extension of this would be that he'll wake up if they can fix the whole station. All of which becomes moot when Mr. Nosybonk appears and grabs Dax before dragging her away. Let's see how Bashir handles the problem without his confidence. Running after Dax doesn't end quite how you'd expect, as in a flash, Bashir is now playing tennis with plain simple Garak. It doesn't seem a particularly fair game given Bashir's advanced age now, so plain simple Garak instead suggests he go to Ops, as that's the best place to make repairs. He finds a corridor of wounded people on the way, and Cisco appears to help treat them. He's Bashir's expertise, it would seem, which is going to be handy if there are technical things to do in Ops. Or would have been if Mr. Nosybonk hadn't grabbed him and dragged him through a wall. Bashir legging it doesn't help, as Mr. Nosybonk appears in front of him, and trying to poop yellow at him doesn't do anything either, so Bashir gives scarpering another go. And now bewrinkled Bashir runs across Kira's corpse, so that's aggression buggered too. Odo's not having a great time of it either, but has just long enough to tell Bashir to crawl through conduits to reach Ops. He picks up O'Brien on the way, who, despite his pessimism, decides to tag along. They don't reach Ops, as the journey instead ends back on the promenade. There's some noise in Quarks from people betting on Bashir's fate, though it's O'Brien that instead carks it. He's swiftly followed by Quark himself, as Mr. Nosybonk chokes him, while Bashir scarpers once more. Plain simple Garak to the rescue, or at least to help him up after he falls. A little thing like a broken hip isn't going to stop him, and plain simple Garak helps him finally get to Ops. It's not quite as he remembers it, largely due to the party decorations and the woman singing happy birthday to him. Not quite sure why she's got Lion-O's hair from the Thundercats, but maybe she's the same species. Bashir's not interested in the party and tries to get the computer running again. The panel to access it is instead full of tennis balls, and down Bashir goes once more. He wants to check behind more panels, but plain simple Garak has decided it's pointless now, and Bashir's stuffed. Except, well, O'Brien was the skepticism, wasn't he? So why is plain simple Garak filling that role now? Come to think of it, why has he been so visibly present without being attacked, like the others were? The answer is because it's really Mr. Nosybonk, and he's now trying to convince Bashir to give up, like he gave up at tennis to focus on medicine, like he gave up on being top of the class because of the pressure, like he gave up on Dax because chasing her was too hard. Bashir's not listening now, though, and is off elsewhere, a turn of events that leaves Mr. Nosybonk sounding slightly concerned. See, Ops isn't the answer. Ops was never the answer, because Ops isn't what matters on the station to Bashir. It was always the infirmary, and that's where he goes now with an increasingly upset Mr. Nosybonk. Bashir's figured out that Mr. Nosybonk can't do dick until he surrenders, and after countering all the arguments about him giving up, he sticks a force field around Mr. Nosybonk and roasts the bastard. Bashir is up and about again, his coma now ended. He's recounting the adventure to plain simple Garak, though the reality is that Mr. Nosybonk got nabbed by Odo shortly after knocking Bashir out in the infirmary. He may be a terrifying telepathic monster, but he was a shit thief. That leaves only a discussion about the little matter of Bashir's mind casting plain simple Garak as the villain. Rather than be offended, he instead chooses to see it as evidence that his little life lessons about trusting nobody are paying off, so we'll leave them to finish their lunch, until the next adventure. You know, if I wasn't aware that Bashir had some great episodes coming, I'd start worrying that he'd caught the same affliction that plagued Chakotay in Voyager, Turkey syndrome. I'm not sure I disliked this one quite as much as I did The Passenger in Season 1, as this tries to do some interesting things, but it's still pretty dire. At least we can't level the blame at Alexander Siddig this time, as he does good work in this one. The stilted delivery of him as Ray Ovantika is replaced with an increasingly crotchety version of the character he's been playing for nearly 3 years, and he's clearly comfortable enough in that to riff on variations. Beyond that, though, and some makeup work that apparently won an award, I can't say I found much to like. The dialogue between other characters felt sufficiently generic as to be lacking any sort of personality. You could argue that's the point, given they're supposed to be representations of psychological aspects, but that doesn't stop them being boring. An intentional turd is still a turd. That lack of character can be levelled at this episode's antagonist as well. Mr. Nosybonk didn't possess any sort of threat or menace, lines delivered in a dull monotone. To be fair to Victor Rivers, the actor who played him, I don't think that was a skill issue. I've heard some of his voice acting work, and it's perfectly fine, so maybe it was a direction choice in this instance. Regardless, it still rendered what was supposed to be the bad guy of the week as something altogether mundane. The result is an episode that I'd personally argue is this season's low point to date. On the plus side, that did make me consider the other 17 episodes up to now and realise what a solid outing it's been, so maybe it has value just for that. Outside of the plot itself, there are a few things for us to explore in a little more detail. The first is a couple of things about Bashir to take away from this one, though they're accidental and won't become relevant for a couple of seasons yet. Mr. Nosybonk suggests Bashir gave up tennis because it's not what his parents would have wanted, and that he threw a test because he didn't want the pressure. Those will come to adopt very different meanings later on, both the expectations of parents and a desire to not draw attention. We could probably debate whether that's just good fortune or writers using the material they've been given in imaginative ways. I'd perhaps argue that it's a bit of both. The second is a line from Plain Simple Garak on aging. When Bashir explains about how humans consider growing old, he says, on Cardassia, advanced age is seen as a sign of power and dignity. We've previously had a few comments about the emphasis Cardigan's place on family. There's been mention of multiple generations living in the same household, for example. But this is the first mention of elders, and I can't help but notice that word power is doing a lot of work. In a culture where deceit and misdirection are so rife, perhaps the simple fact that you've managed to reach old age at all confers a level of respect, or at the very least, a healthy dose of caution. End of episode.
I'm beginning to think we should knock this whole thing on the head, you know. Everything we've tried to figure out who framed us has backfired. I reckon we should cut our losses before Odo gives us permanent accommodation in one of those cells.
We've had some problems, I'll admit, but it's not been all bad.
Are you out of your tree? It's been an unmitigated disaster. We're no closer to finding out who's behind all this. We accidentally watched an Anshandy film with Quark in it, and we're down a full bar of Latinum.
Actually, we're 2 bars up.
You what?
I said we've got 3 bars of Latinum now.
How the bloody hell did you do that?
I just sold the video of Quark to Morn. Woof.